The night was supposed to be ordinary, just another Friday sleepover, a chance for Emma Rodriguez to spend time with her stepmom, Lisa, in their quiet Utah home nestled against the rugged Wasatch Mountains. No one could have predicted that by morning, Emma would vanish without a trace, leaving behind a mystery that would consume her family and challenge local law enforcement for months. Emma wasn't just another teenager. At 18, she was on the cusp of adulthood, smart and ambitious, with dreams of becoming a forensic psychologist. Her relationship with her stepmom, Lisa, had always been complicated. They weren't close in the way some families are, but they maintained a cordial, functional dynamic for the sake of Emma's father, Michael. Michael and Lisa had been married for 7 years, blending their families after both had gone through difficult divorces. Emma's biological mother had been out of the picture for years, leaving a complicated emotional landscape that Emma was still navigating. The night of July 14 started like any other sleepover. Around 8 p.m., Emma arrived at Lisa's home, carrying an overnight bag and her laptop. Her father was away on a business trip, which wasn't unusual. Emma was an independent young woman, comfortable staying with her stepmother while Michael traveled. What happened in those late-night hours remained shrouded in mystery. Lisa would later tell investigators that they had watched a movie together and shared some pizza. Then, Emma retired to the guest room around 11 p.m. Everything seemed normal, Lisa insisted. But by 7 a.m. the next morning, something was terribly wrong. Emma was gone. Her overnight bag remained packed in the guest room. Her phone was still charging on the bedside table. There were no signs of struggle, no indication of where she might have gone. Lisa's first call was to Michael. Her voice trembled as she explained that Emma had seemingly disappeared into thin air. Michael, still hundreds of miles away, immediately contacted local law enforcement. The Provo Police Department responded quickly. Detective Sarah Johnson, a 15-year veteran of missing persons investigations, was assigned to the case. From the beginning, something felt off to her. The seamless, almost too perfect narrative from Lisa raised subtle red flags. Preliminary interviews revealed inconsistencies. Lisa's timeline seemed rehearsed, her demeanor more calculated than genuinely distressed. Emma's friends painted a different picture of their relationship. They spoke of tension, of Emma feeling uncomfortable around her stepmother, of unspoken dynamics that never quite made sense. One of Emma's closest friends, Rachel Torres, revealed a conversation they'd had just weeks before her disappearance. "Emma told me she felt like something was wrong," Rachel said. She didn't elaborate, but she seemed scared, not of a stranger, but of something closer to home. As days turned into weeks, the investigation deepened. Cell phone records, surveillance footage, credit card transactions, every possible avenue was explored. Emma had simply vanished, with no digital footprint, no communication, nothing. Michael's world collapsed. A successful software engineer, he found himself consumed by grief and uncertainty. The not knowing was perhaps the most brutal aspect of Emma's disappearance. Was she alive? Kidnapped? Had she run away? Forensic evidence was frustratingly minimal. The guest room where Emma had slept revealed no signs of forced entry or struggle. Her personal items were untouched. It was as if she had simply evaporated. Months of investigation produced more questions than answers. Lisa maintained her story with an almost unsettling consistency. She cooperated with investigators, offered to take polygraph tests, and appeared genuinely concerned. Yet something always felt slightly off. A breakthrough came 11 months into the investigation. An anonymous tip suggested looking into Lisa's past, a suggestion that would ultimately unravel a complex web of secrets. Investigators discovered that Lisa had a sealed juvenile record, something that hadn't been immediately apparent during initial background checks. The details were shocking. A decades-old incident involving the disappearance of a teenage girl when Lisa was herself a teenager. The case was never solved. The girl had never been found. And now, eerily, history seemed to be repeating itself. As this new information emerged, the investigation took a dramatic turn. What had seemed like a mysterious disappearance was transforming into something far more sinister. Emma Rodriguez remained missing, but the truth, investigators were certain, was closer than anyone realized, and it was going to change everything. The anonymous tip about Lisa's sealed juvenile record was like a match dropped into a room filled with gasoline. Detective Johnson knew they were on the precipice of something big, something that had been buried for decades. Sealed records aren't impossible to access, but they require special judicial permission. What Hernandez discovered sent a chill down her spine. The previous case, the disappeared teenage girl from 30 years ago, shared haunting similarities with Emma's disappearance. The girl's name was Jennifer Hartley. She had vanished in almost identical circumstances. During a family gathering with no signs of struggle, no digital trace. At the time, Lisa, then known by a different last name, had been a teenager living in a small town outside Salt Lake City. No charges were ever filed. Nobody was ever found. But whispers had always surrounded Lisa, a persistent undercurrent of suspicion that she knew more than she'd ever admitted. Michael Rodriguez couldn't believe what he was hearing. The woman he'd been married to for 7 years, the woman who had been a part of his daughter's life, suddenly seemed like a complete stranger. Forensic psychologists brought in to analyze the case noticed a pattern. Lisa's cooperation with investigators was too perfect, and her demeanor was too controlled. It was the kind of performance that suggested someone who had practiced their story many times. Then came the first real break in the case. A truck driver coming through Spanish Fork Canyon reported something unusual. About 2 weeks after Emma's disappearance, he remembered seeing a dark-colored SUV, matching Lisa's vehicle, parked in a remote area known for its treacherous terrain and dense woodland. The location was significant. It was a region notorious for its difficult search conditions. Steep ravines, thick vegetation, and unpredictable terrain made it a potential perfect disposal site for someone wanting to hide evidence. Search teams were dispatched immediately. What they found would crack the case wide open. Buried beneath layers of rock and vegetation, they discovered fragments of evidence. A piece of fabric matching Emma's jacket, a broken cell phone screen, and most chillingly, evidence that suggested this wasn't the first time such a site had been used. Forensic analysis would later reveal DNA traces that connected not just to Emma, but potentially to Jennifer Hartley from 30 years earlier. Lisa's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. When confronted with the mounting evidence, her composure finally broke. But not in the way anyone expected. She didn't confess. She didn't break down in tears. Instead, she went completely silent, requesting a lawyer and refusing to speak another word. The investigation had transformed from a missing person case to a potential serial investigation. How many other girls might Lisa have been connected to? How many families had been left without closure? Michael Rodriguez was devastated. The woman he thought he knew, the woman who had been part of his family, was now the prime suspect in his daughter's disappearance. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. As winter approached, bringing with it the harsh Utah mountain climate, the search for Emma continued. Each day without answers was another day of excruciating uncertainty for her family and friends. But Detective Johnson was certain of one thing. They were closer to the truth than ever before. And the truth, when it finally emerged, would shake the foundations of everything everyone believed about Lisa, about family, and about the darkness that can hide behind the most ordinary facades. The psychological profile of Lisa emerged as a complex tapestry of manipulation and calculated behavior. Dr. Elena Clifford, a renowned forensic psychologist brought in to consult on the case, described her as a predator with an extraordinary ability to blend into normal family structures. Interviews with Lisa's past associates revealed a pattern. She had a history of inserting herself into families, creating an illusion of normalcy while maintaining a carefully constructed exterior. Her first marriage had ended mysteriously. Her previous job as a substitute teacher had multiple unexplained gaps in employment. What we're seeing is a textbook case of a highly intelligent manipulator, Dr. Clifford explained to the investigative team. Lisa doesn't just commit acts of violence. She architects entire scenarios, creating elaborate narratives that make her appear beyond suspicion. Cellular data became crucial. Forensic analysts discovered something extraordinary. In the weeks leading up to Emma's disappearance, Lisa had been making regular trips to remote locations in Utah's wilderness. These weren't casual outings. They were methodical, precisely timed excursions that suggested careful planning. Michael Rodriguez's world continued to unravel. He discovered hidden documents in their home, journals, maps, and cryptic notes that suggested Lisa had been planning something for years. It wasn't just about Emma. These were systematic preparations for something far more calculated. The investigation took an unexpected turn when they discovered connections to unsolved missing persons cases across 3 states. Each case shared subtle similarities. Young women, typically between 18 and 22, who disappeared without a trace. The common thread? Lisa had been in proximity to each location. Psychological profilers began constructing a narrative. Lisa wasn't just a random perpetrator. She was a predator with a specific psychological profile, someone who derived power from manipulation and control. Her ability to insert herself into family structures wasn't accidental. It was a carefully developed strategy. She doesn't just choose victims, Dr. Clifford noted. She chooses entire family ecosystems she can infiltrate and manipulate. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Jennifer Hartley's younger sister, now in her 50s, came forward with crucial information. She had always suspected Lisa, then known as Linda Carpenter, was responsible for her sister's disappearance. She was always watching, the sister recalled, not in a threatening way, but like she was studying us, collecting information, waiting. Forensic evidence began painting a more complete picture. The locations where Lisa had traveled matched historical sites of other unexplained disappearances. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a calculated pattern. DNA evidence started connecting the dots. Trace genetic materials found at multiple sites suggested Lisa had been operating undetected for decades. She wasn't a sudden criminal. She was a carefully concealed serial predator who had perfected her method over the years. Michael Rodriguez faced an impossible emotional landscape. The woman he had trusted, who had been part of his daughter's life, was potentially responsible for multiple disappearances. The betrayal was multi-layered, personal, familial, existential. As winter descended on Utah, the investigation intensified. Each piece of evidence brought them closer to understanding not just what happened to Emma, but potentially uncovering a decades-long pattern of calculated disappearances. The mountain wilderness held secrets, and those secrets were finally beginning to speak. The final pieces of the puzzle began falling into place during a marathon interrogation session. Lisa, typically composed and calculated, showed her first genuine crack in the carefully constructed facade she had maintained for decades. Forensic psychologists had strategically positioned Detective Johnson and Dr. Elena Clifford in the interrogation room. Their approach wasn't confrontational, but methodical, a psychological chess match designed to unravel Lisa's intricate web of lies. "What happened to Emma?" Dr. Clifford asked, her voice calm and clinical. "Not what you've told us before. The truth." Lisa's response came after a long, calculated silence. "Some stories are better left unfinished," she said, a cryptic smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The breakthrough came from an unexpected connection. A retired detective who had worked on the Jennifer Hartley case decades ago remembered something. Lisa, or Linda, as she was known then, had a biological father who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Her mother had remarried, and Lisa had essentially reinvented herself multiple times throughout her life. Forensic genealogists discovered a shocking truth. Lisa had been adopted as a child, and her original birth records were sealed. Her entire identity was a carefully constructed narrative, with multiple gaps that suggested a deliberate attempt to hide her true origins. Michael Rodriguez's investigation into his own family history revealed something equally disturbing. Lisa had met him through an elaborate setup, a chance encounter that was anything but chance. She had systematically chosen him, studied his life, and inserted herself into his family with surgical precision. The wilderness search teams made a breakthrough. Deep in a remote canyon, they discovered a hidden underground structure. It wasn't a simple hideout, but a meticulously planned space. Forensic evidence suggested it had been used multiple times over decades. Inside, they found personal items belonging to multiple missing women. Journals, photographs, and tokens that suggested Lisa had been collecting memories of her victims, not as trophies, but as part of a complex psychological ritual of control and observation. Dr. Clifford's psychological profile of Lisa evolved. She wasn't a typical serial predator. Her motivations weren't sexual or purely violent. She was driven by a profound need to deconstruct family structures, to infiltrate and manipulate the most intimate human connections. It's about power, Dr. Clifford explained to the investigation team. Not the power of violence, but the power of complete psychological manipulation. Lisa doesn't just remove people. She dismantles entire emotional ecosystems. The resolution came not with a dramatic confession, but with a calculated reveal. Lisa understood she was caught, but she wasn't interested in explaining herself. Her final statement was chilling in its simplicity. Families are fragile constructions, she told the investigators. I simply revealed how easily they can be broken. Emma's ultimate fate remained partially unknown. Forensic evidence suggested she was deceased, but her body was never fully recovered. The mountain wilderness had become both a crime scene and a tomb. Michael Rodriguez's life was irrevocably shattered. The woman he had trusted, who had been part of his daily existence, was revealed as a complex predator who had systematically destroyed multiple lives. The investigation uncovered connections to at least 7 missing women across 3 states. Lisa had been operating undetected for nearly 3 decades, creating and destroying family narratives with calculated precision. As winter turned to spring in Utah, the case became more than just a criminal investigation. It was a profound exploration of human psychology, of the thin line between trust and manipulation, of how well we truly know the people closest to us. The mountains kept their secrets, but some of those secrets had finally been brought to light. Dr. Elena Clifford's comprehensive psychological assessment of Lisa revealed a complex disorder that defied traditional categorization. It wasn't just antisocial personality disorder or psychopathy. Lisa represented a rare psychological phenomenon of systematic emotional predation. We're looking at a unique form of psychological parasitism, Dr. Clifford explained in her detailed report. Lisa doesn't just infiltrate families. She deconstructs them from within, treating human relationships as elaborate experimental systems. Forensic psychology revealed that Lisa's behavior stemmed from a profound childhood trauma. Abandoned multiple times, shifted between foster homes, she had developed an almost scientific approach to human connections. Families weren't emotional units to her. They were intricate mechanisms to be studied, manipulated, and ultimately dismantled. Her methodology was frighteningly intelligent. She would spend months, sometimes years, preparing her approach. Each family infiltration was meticulously planned, with contingencies for multiple scenarios. She didn't just choose victims. She selected entire family ecosystems that she could systematically dismantle. The final stages of the investigation revealed a network far more complex than initially suspected. Lisa wasn't working alone. Cellular data and financial records suggested she had connections, perhaps even a support system, that had helped her operate undetected for decades. Detective Johnson's team discovered encrypted communications, hidden bank accounts, and a series of carefully maintained false identities. Lisa had created an infrastructure that allowed her to move between different states and different identities, always staying one step ahead of law enforcement. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A former foster child who had been in the same system as Lisa during her teenage years came forward. She revealed that Lisa had always been different, observing, collecting information, and creating elaborate narratives that seemed designed to manipulate those around her. Forensic evidence connected Lisa to at least 9 confirmed disappearances, with potential links to several more unresolved cases across the western United States. Her method was consistent. Infiltrate a family, create trust, and then systematically isolate and remove specific targets. The case exposed significant gaps in how law enforcement tracks long-term predators who operate through psychological manipulation rather than traditional criminal patterns. Lisa had exploited systemic weaknesses, sealed juvenile records, gaps in interstate communication, and the inherent trust within family structures. Michael Rodriguez became an unexpected advocate. Instead of retreating, he used his experience to push for legislative changes. He lobbied for improved tracking of sealed juvenile records, better communication between state law enforcement agencies, and more comprehensive background check systems. The most dangerous predators, Michael would later say in congressional testimony, aren't those who leave physical evidence. They're the ones who understand the psychology of trust. The case became a landmark study in forensic psychology. Universities began using Lisa's profile as a critical case study in understanding complex psychological manipulation. Her ability to create and destroy family narratives challenged the existing understanding of criminal behavior. Dr. Clifford's research suggested that Lisa represented an extremely rare psychological profile, someone who viewed human relationships as complex systems to be studied and dismantled. She wasn't motivated by typical criminal desires. Her actions were more akin to a disturbing form of social experimentation. Emma's memory became a catalyst for change. What began as a personal tragedy transformed into a broader societal awakening about the complex nature of psychological predation. The investigation had done more than solve a case. It had opened a window into a previously unexplored dimension of human psychological vulnerability. Victim support groups, forensic psychology departments, and law enforcement agencies began developing more sophisticated approaches to understanding and identifying potential long-term psychological predators. The case demonstrated that trauma isn't always about physical violence. It can be a systematic deconstruction of emotional safety. The mountains of Utah had kept their secrets for decades. But now, those secrets were finally being brought into the light, revealing a story far more complex than anyone could have imagined.